Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
Today we're going to talk about economic development. Basically, what is the status of the economy of Indiana, and what are state and local governments doing to attract industry and business and increase employment opportunities for Hoosiers? Panelists for today's Public Affairs Roundtable will be John Fallon, Director of Public Service within the School of Continuing Education at Ball State University, Dean Whitaker, who is Director of the Indiana Economic Development Academy, and John Rouse from the Department of Political Science at Ball State University. Dean Whitaker, what is the Indiana Economic Development Academy and what does it do?
The Indiana Economic Development Academy has a purpose of helping to train community leaders and volunteers and professionals in the arts and sciences of economic development. That being to improve the local economy and improve the quality of life both in the community and in the state.
To make these, it is teaching them how to make their communities more attractive for employers?
Well, not just employers, but to make their communities a better place to live, and thereby being a better place for new businesses to start up and to locate. One of the primary ways to improve the quality of life in a community is to increase the job opportunities and to expand the tax base.
Is the concept working?
I think so.
How old is this program?
This program is almost 2 years old as of January. It'll be in existence for 2 years. It's conducted 3 major week-long residential workshops as well as over 85 community-based workshops. And again, it's a training effort, an educational program to teach local people what they can do to improve the quality of life of their communities.
Is there some way to measure then the accomplishments or the achievements thus far? Can you do it on a scale of new business growth?
We're beginning to see some results. As with any training program, you first have to teach and then you sit back and wait to see what the results are. There are communities in Indiana now who have had success in soliciting new ventures for their communities, which have resulted in new jobs, who have participated in the training program. Again, it takes local initiative and local determination in order to succeed at these types of projects. But it's a case where we're offering the training and teaching the techniques and giving them the tools to be able to do that.
We hear numbers from state officials about the number of jobs that have been created in Indiana, the number of jobs that have been saved in Indiana. What is the status of the economy in terms of, employment opportunities for Hoosiers?
In general, the number of jobs are increasing in Indiana. Over the past year, we've seen a fairly significant increase in the total number of new jobs. The disheartening part of that, however, is that the manufacturing sector, which is basically 40% of Indiana's economy, has decreased in the total number of jobs available in the manufacturing area. So what we're seeing in Indiana, as is taking place in the rest of the country, is a shifting of manufacturing employment, shifting away from manufacturing more into the service industries. And Indiana, like other states, are seeing that same shift from manufacturing more into service and information-based type of economy. And we're seeing that same trend taking place in Indiana.
Dean, if I could interrupt here, of course, none of this exists without a grounding in politics. We talk about the phrase political economy. The politics, I believe, of Indiana, in a sense, I would call it conservative politics, but in a way, liberal government. The thing I'm trying to point out here is that, as I understand it, your program is one that is funded by the state. It's not funded by any particular private sector organization. It is one that does have a political grounding, does it not?
It does to a degree. It has a political grounding in the sense that the Indiana legislature, on a bipartisan effort, funded the academy to conduct these training programs and to become the educational arm of economic development in the state. So it does have that in terms of a political base for itself. I think also it's part of a continuing effort to create such entities as the Corporation for Science and Technology, which has as its mission the investing in the development of new products through investing grant money in both universities and businesses. Another example of that same initiative by the government has been the creation for the Center for Innovation Development, which is a venture capital fund. Also, Indiana, and again, I think in a very liberal sense, in a very progressive sense, created the Institute for New Business Ventures, which helps new businesses get started and stay in business.
But it seems that the state would not be involved in this unless the political economy of this state were indeed declining. Meaning, for example, that people are leaving Indiana to get jobs in the Sun Belt. For example, a couple of years ago, we lost our 11th congressperson. We went from basically from 9 to 8. So we're losing population. So the things that you and John are doing would not be done unless the political economy of this state is indeed declining.
In terms of the overall economy, I don't think there's a case where, again, it depends how you measure it. If you measure it in terms of electoral votes, or if you measure it in terms of new jobs created, or if you measure it in terms of per capita income, it depends on what measure you use to look at the economy. I think you're correct in terms of the loss of political clout, both in Washington and elsewhere. Indiana, along with the Midwest and the Northeast, has suffered a shift in population from the Northeast to the Southwest generally. And I think with that shift has gone a shift in political clout within Congress. But at the same time, there's a number of issues to look down the road and taking a longer-term strategic view of Indiana, and that is the access to water. And I think water will become one of the key issues in the 1990s and the year 2000, the availability of water for development of an area.
Well, hasn't economic development become a real buzzword, though, with everyone? Isn't a matter of Indiana's program been part of keeping up with its neighbors, keeping up with the Joneses, in fact, because everyone has an economic development effort, and if not to initiate growth, at least to maintain where you are, you need to compete, and you need your own strong economic development program.
There's a couple things I think taking place. One is, and having been the former director of industrial development for Illinois, I can give you a little perspective of competitiveness as well as what other states are doing. I think there's an opportunity here where Indiana has taken the initiative. I mentioned those 3 corporations which have been created. That's very innovative, and I think that's a leader in the country as far as an innovative idea for assisting in the creation of new jobs. There's a lot of Me Tooism that takes place in any state. There is, practically every state has a Department of Commerce or some equivalent that is engaged in the business of soliciting business for their particular localities. I think that there has been, however, some innovation in Indiana that's not taken place in other states. There is a plan called the In Step of the Future plan, which takes a strategic view of the economy and developing policies, long-range policies, that will try to address some of the issues raised earlier as far as the decline of certain sectors of the Indiana economy. The steel industry in the Gary and the Hammond area as an example of an area within the state which is still suffering very high unemployment, when you have an Indianapolis which is growing. So you've got areas within the state.
Dean, if you look at that phrase, political economy, the economy refers to things like you mentioned, the automobile industry, the steel industry. We see a decline in the number of jobs in the automobile industry. So if you look at the politics sets the grounding for the development or the growth of the industry. So in terms of the politics, is this a thing that is coming from the state level? For example, this is a function of Ball State University in a sense. Is it something that is coming in terms of the initiative from the governor's office, or does it come in terms of its initiative from the local governments?
Well, the answer to the question is all of the above, and that's probably the typical multiple choice answer that you might expect. It comes from a number of places because the need is in every one of those locations. This particular initiative for the Academy came from John Fallon and his thinking as far as how the university could be used as an economic development tool to help the state of Indiana improve its economy. And so a need or an opportunity was seen to use the university in this way. In addition, simultaneously, the legislature is wrestling with the problem, what do we do to help our communities improve their competitiveness, which was addressed earlier, in the economy? How can these communities compete with the over 15,000 organizations around the country, all interested in expanding their tax base and creating more job opportunities? So I think it's because there was a number of people all perceiving the need simultaneously or fairly simultaneously, both in terms of the legislature, in terms of the current administration in power, in terms of Ball State University. All these people have identified a common need and thereby contributed what they could, the legislature in terms of funding the program, Ball State in terms of people and space and talent, and local communities in terms of their volunteers and professional efforts.
Okay, John Fallon, as Director of Public Service, where do you fit into this picture of economic development?
Well, we saw the opportunity a few years ago to make the university's resources available to fit into the mosaic of economic development at the state level. In some of the programs that we operate that do provide training for local government executives, be they mayors, county commissioners, or boards that operate those governments, there was a clear opportunity and a lack of information about economic development, and it seemed like a natural for the academy to fit in. What I've observed over the last couple of years is that economic development is wonderfully confusing statewide. In terms of the political aspects of economic development, that always gets couched in terms of jobs. You don't hear mayors talk about the creation of wealth. Not that they don't understand it, but that's not a very good political issue. By the same token, you don't hear bankers talk very often about jobs. So there's two angles to this. There's the political side, which people use to get elected, and that always is couched in terms of employment opportunities. But bankers are concerned with the creation of wealth, and jobs are a secondary function
Well, John,
of the wealth that's created.
Let me press you on that point. How much is economic development really a political issue?
At the state level, I'd say it's an important, perhaps, depending on who you talk to, the singular important political issue in the state. Education in the last couple of years has become an important statewide political issue. But then there are those people who would be quick to say that one of the best economic strategies that local economic development strategies that local Indiana communities can employ is to upgrade their educational system. That is one of the things that would fit into what Dean referred to earlier as making the community more attractive, making the community educational system a significant factor in improving the quality of life in the locale. Well, we have learned, and I'm a distant observer to this phenomenon called economic development, but I do know that when industrial location is the issue, and people are considering, for example, locating a plant in a new community, one of the things they look at early on in their research is the local educational system. So it's confusing. It's wonderfully confusing, I might say.
When we look at attracting business and industry in the state or expansion of existing businesses or industries, we hear about these large multi-million-dollar incentive packages. Lieutenant Governor Mutz wouldn't even disclose what all we tried to give to Mitsubishi and Chrysler to get that plant in Indiana. But some communities are saying, yes, we have a 10 or a 12 or a $15 million package of incentives. What are we talking about?
Well, I take a quick shot at that, and Dean, I know, has something to say. $15 million sounds like an awful lot of money, and it is an awful lot of money in the days of scarce resources. However, when you consider the long-term life cycle of a plant location in a community, let's say a Mitsubishi that might have 500 or 1,000 employees, $15 million over a 30-year life cycle of that plant location is a fairly insignificant amount of money when facilities and payroll and the purchase of raw materials are all considered. It sounds like an awful lot of money, and is, but over the course of the life cycle of the industry or the plant, it's just not that significant.
What is the short-term sacrifice in a local community or the state gives up in terms of tax breaks of certain sort? What makes up that $12 or $15 million figure?
It can be a number of things. One of the more common ones is tax abatement, property tax abatement, or postponing of assessing a particular piece of property is a common incentive that's often offered, particularly in southern states. Another major component, which is an interesting one, is training funds. And I think it's interesting because it serves a couple purposes. One, it offers an inducement for the location of the company in terms of a qualified, trained workforce when they begin operation, but also it improves the quality of labor that we have available in Indiana. So what we're really doing when we're offering that kind of incentive is we're investing in our own people. And I think that's why that particular incentive is one that I feel good about as far as offering to a company, because we're actually upgrading the skills of people within the state, and those skills tend to remain in the state regardless of what happens to the company.
And what do you say to the skeptic who says this is nothing more than a shameless bidding war, that you get Indiana and Illinois?
I think it's true, is what I feel about it. Because I think what's taken place, and particularly in terms of the major projects, the thousands of jobs kinds of facilities, the 5,000 job projects, I think what's happened is corporate America has put these projects up on the auction block. And I think it began some time ago when Pennsylvania bid on a Volkswagen plant. And I, at that time, was in Illinois, and we were trying to figure out what we could offer to outbid Pennsylvania. And as a result of that, what we found was that we had to take a serious look at cost-benefit. There was an article written about that particular plant that was called The Rabbit That Ate Pennsylvania. And the argument there was that the benefit derived from the incentives given far were insignificant compared to what was given. So what they were saying is they were giving far more than they were getting in terms of benefits. That was one author's opinion. And I think every community and every state has to ask themselves a question: what is the cost benefit to our community or to our state based on the amount of incentives that we're offering? And each situation will be different.
Isn't that pretty much what Lieutenant Governor Mutz said when we lost the Mitsubishi plant to Illinois, is that, well, we went as far as we thought we could go without giving away the store, like without sacrificing everything?
And that's true. And I also feel that, again, it's a cost-benefit analysis that has to be done of each project. And in this particular case, perhaps Illinois had a greater need and therefore was willing to give a greater incentive to locate the facility. One of the other arguments I often use when getting into a situation on incentives is that incentives are often given to make up for some deficit that a location might have. For example, many of the southern states were compensating industries because of a dislocation on transportation costs. So they were locating in Mississippi as compared to Chicago, but as a result, the transportation costs back to the Chicago market were going to be substantially greater. And therefore, by offsetting that with, say, a lower tax, property tax, enabled them to locate there economically and still serve their Chicago marketplace.
But where does that fit, Dean, into what you were talking about earlier, is that companies that are looking for a place to put a large plant and to put its employees, where does that fit in looking at the community and the transportation, the education, the parks, all these other factors? What's more important, the community and its character and its education, or that multi-million-dollar package of incentives?
Well, I think what happens is one can outweigh the other, but it takes a significant amount of dollars to change the balance. I believe what occurs is that many localities could be suitable for that Mitsubishi location. When all things become equal, okay, the location, the transportation costs, labor costs, the other economic factors that help determine that location are equal among 5 or 6 choices. Then it gets down to kind of a bidding war. That's where the incentives begin to sway the balance between an Indiana or a Tennessee or an Illinois, as far as if any of those choices would have been suitable from the company's economic point of view, then the incentives begin to make the difference. And also, I might add, that's when the quality of education, that's when the quality of life factors begin to change the picture. One of the interesting areas that John mentioned is education, and I think one of the things we're about to do in Indiana is to take a much stronger position in terms of improving the quality of education. As we talked earlier, we're shifting from a manufacturing-based economy to an information-based economy in which education plays a much higher role in the location factor of where these companies choose to locate. And therefore, I think Indiana is making the right move in terms of taking a look at its education system and seeing how it can be improved.
John, Dean, let me follow up with this. It seems to me, and from a kind of a philosophical point of view, that the strength of our state is also its weakness. And the strength is that we have a very motivated labor force. The weakness, well, the strength is also that we have a very active, organized labor force. I mean, on the other side, you have the focus in terms of business, in terms of a very key focus upon enterprise. Our strength is that in history, we are a rich state. In a sense, we have this attitude that we don't need help from the outside. Are we in the position, in that position of saying that we really don't need help from outside, that we can take it on our own? And how does this history of wealth in Indiana keep us from being open to new ideas that occur in society?
It's a very difficult question and has a lot of different parts to it. As a wealthy state, I think one of the things that's happened is that we've tended to rely on the wealth and assume that things are going to continue as they've always continued. For example, in working up in the Gary, Hammond, Hobart area of the state, one of the things I've noticed is a lot of people think the steel industry will come back. And so many of those areas suffering high unemployment think it's just a matter of time, and if they wait long enough, that this cycle in the economy will change around and we'll all be back working at the steel mills. That's not going to happen. So from the standpoint of one of the drawbacks that I see to the wealth of the economy of the state has been the perception that things will come back, a tendency to wait for the next economic cycle to rejuvenate the steel industry. Well, unfortunately, we're into some bigger cycles than just a few years, and it could be many years before the steel industry would ever come back to the level that it is now. And that industry's product is being replaced by plastics and other areas. I don't think that Indiana is adjusting as quickly as it could or should to the shift in the national economy, and as I mentioned before, the shift from a manufacturing-based economy to an information-based economy. And there's where some real opportunities and some challenges face us.
Yeah, I think it's difficult for us to put this into a perspective because the Midwest is a rich part of the country, and we do have many strengths in terms of our educational institutions. However, because they're strong, sometimes we get in a mode where we are reluctant to change in the sense of bringing in new kinds of ideas.
That's a statement, not a question.
I think that it is an indication in terms of where we are, in terms of where we go from here. It's one in the sense that we have a good base. What do we keep and what do we change?
I think those questions are being addressed right now through the Indiana Economic Development Council and its work to address some of the long-term policy issues facing the state, and an analysis of what's taking place in terms of various economic sectors, one being manufacturing, but then within manufacturing, automobiles and steel and some of the other components of that particular manufacturing industry. So I think there is some concern and some projects that are addressing those issues that you raised.
Yeah, Larry, to try to answer the question, if it is a statement or a question, I think this whole issue is, rather complex. And we have a very diverse, pluralistic society. And we just don't have one group that's going to say, we're going to do it this way. The issue is, in a sense, how do we develop a consensus? The way I would look at it, a political consensus for change within Indiana. And that is both a statement and a question. And it's something that I'm sure that we will not be able to solve.
Well, we look at the recent flap involving the state and the city of Terre Haute, which has pretty much its own initiative at this point toward the officials of Toyota Motor Company, that they say the state is not working hard enough. They've looked at Lafayette, they're pushing Toyota people elsewhere in the state and not at Terre Haute. Is there a place in this scheme of economic development and the pursuit of new industry and new business for individual initiatives by communities?
I think there has to be, because that's one of Indiana's strengths, is the individual's initiative of the state. That's what made Indiana what it is. But at the same time, particularly in the case of approaching a Japanese audience, that's viewed as not the correct approach to go from a Japanese point of view. Because one of the things that often happens is that a Japanese views things by consensus management. And so what they're looking for is one spokesman or one group representing an entire area. And so I think that the Lieutenant Governor may have been correct in terms of pointing out that we need to go at this in a unified way, because without that consensus, the Japanese perceive us as being disorganized and not having a unified effort at recruiting or meeting their needs.
And then if the state of Indiana says, Terre Haute, no, we don't think you're right, then what does Terre Haute do? Say, well, fine. Or if Muncie says, we'd like that plant, Lieutenant Governor Mutt, so why don't you send them our way? Or do we say, no, we'll let the state decide what's right for Toyota?
I think each area has to decide on what's right for itself, and that's, again, getting back to the individual initiative. But in terms of this particular example, what I'm saying is from the Japanese perspective, putting ourselves in their shoes, looking at Indiana, it appears to them that we're fragmented and we're not well organized in what we're attempting to do. So the whole cause is hurt as far as the recruitment of that particular effort for Indiana. I think each area has to decide what are its strengths, what are its weaknesses, how can it capitalize on its strengths, and how can it minimize its weaknesses, and take a market niche and determine what its strengths are and go after that particular strength.
And I guess at that point we have to trust those people who are heading this statewide effort to look after our own best interests from time to time and trust them to do things that are right for us?
I think that's one of the reasons why we have an electoral process. So we elect them to represent our interests. And that's one of their purposes of being in office, is to help us in terms of our economic development efforts.
John, if I could ask the question.
In 30 seconds.
What is happening in terms of Ball State University? How does Ball State University, in terms of your job and your function, fit in this whole process?
We're doing a few other things that relate to the economic development condition in the state. One is, one thing we feel strongly about here at Ball State, in terms of economic development from a local government perspective, is that good government is good for economic development in the state, and we offer a long list of training programs for government officials. The Center for Entrepreneurial Resources and Applied Research is another program that we operate.
And many more we'll have to learn about later. Thanks to our guests, Dean Whitaker, John Fallon, and John Rouse for the comments today on Public Affairs Roundtable. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for being with us.
If you have comments regarding this program, please address them to John Rouse, Box 149, Muncie, Indiana 47305. The producer for Public Affairs Roundtable is John Rouse. Associate producers are Cecil Bohannon and Bill Mosier. This program is a production of University Media Services, the Department of Political Science, and radio and television stations on the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana.